Hi guys, it's Scarlett here. I hope you're doing well. So I wanted to do another live chat through YouTube with you because these are kind of fun and spontaneous. So I thought it would be nice to try again and see how it goes. So do feel free as you're watching to chime in with your thoughts, questions. I like these live videos to be very casual and I want it to be a place for you to share your own ideas. So it's more of a conversation than just me talking to a screen, I guess. And I thought of a fun topic, or at least I think it's a fun topic for today. And it came to me because I've been watching a whole lot of YouTube videos about Jordan Peterson. So if you're not aware who he is, he's been in the news a lot. So he is a Canadian professor and clinical psychologist, and he talks about a very wide range of topics. He's a very polarizing figure. He claims to be kind of like a classical liberal, but a lot of people on the far right like him too. So it's very polarizing. You have people that love him and hate him, which makes it interesting, I guess you can say. And it makes it difficult for me too, because I definitely agree with a lot of what he says, but not everything he says. So I'm not a complete fangirl, but I definitely enjoy listening to other people's perspectives and especially philosophical ideas. So I've been watching a lot of his stuff recently, and it really struck me on how much of what he says also is said about tarot. There's a lot of his ideas and philosophies and thoughts about the human experience, about mysticism, about mythology that you see mirrored in tarot. So a lot of that is really interesting to me. I think there's a lot of connection there. There's also some disconnect. But I wanted to kind of chat about that with you guys because I think it's interesting to have such a prominent figure right now, extremely polarizing, but also like really popular. I think it's like self-help book. It's like #1 on Amazon right now. There's thousands of videos on YouTube you can watch on his lectures that he's given. To have such a prominent figure right now discussing Jungian archetypes, which is bizarre to me because this has been kind of a niche field of study, you know, for most of my life. And so much of tarot is about Carl Jung and his ideas that it's fascinating to me that a figure who is talking about that kind of stuff is so prominent in the media and the news right now. So what he's really doing is he's bringing a lot of these Jungian ideas back into society, back into the conversation, back into the media. And he's kind of using the archetypes as a way for people to better understand themselves and their place in the universe. He's using that as a foundation for the human experience, which is what tarot does too for the most part. We're using the idea of archetypes, which are represented by the major arcana cards, and using that as a foundational method to understand our own lives and understand our placement within that wider universal experience. So it's exciting because, you know, Carl Jung, he talks about the hero's journey, right? Where as humans, we're constantly hoping and striving for a quest, right? And that's called the hero's journey. And you see that everywhere. You see that in movies and theater and in books and mythology and religion and all forms of spirituality, right? And I think that with tarot, we talk about the hero's journey, but we call it the fool's journey, right? So the fool's quest or the fool's journey to move along and interact with all these ideas and characters and archetypes represented by the other major arcana cards until he achieves some type of form of enlightenment in a way. So Carl Jung's hero's journey is basically the basis for the fool's journey in tarot. So there's so much kind of overlap. So as Jordan Peterson becomes more and more popular, so are Carl Jung's ideas. And because Carl Jung's ideas are becoming more popular, that eventually is going to lead to more and more people picking up tarot because that's a huge part of what tarot is about. And I think that the idea of archetypes too, that being a conversation we're having nowadays, is fascinating, and I'm excited to be a part of it. Oh, and I can see a few of you guys chime in now. Definitely keep sharing your questions, and I'll bring them in when I can into the conversation. And yeah, so with the idea of archetypes, and I think he understands, or at least Jordan Peterson, what I like is that he understands that the world religions are just kind of expressions of these sacred archetypes. And you see the same archetypes in most religions and spiritual practices, as well as, you know, movies and literature. I mean, what is Star Wars except the hero's journey, right? Even you can, he has a great lecture, a great video on YouTube where he just talks about the second Harry Potter book, The Chamber of Secrets, and connects it to the story of St. George and the Dragon. So these are ideas that are repeated. They're repeated and taken throughout multiple different cultures, multiple different time periods. And it's fascinating that tarot, that's what tarot talks about. That's why you get a card like the High Priestess, for example, and this card represents the archetype of the feminine mystic, right? Or the sacred feminine. And they're doing that by representing a whole hodgepodge of various religious symbols. And using these religious symbols from multiple different cultures and time periods, they're asking the question, well, what is the sacred feminine? And what within those religions and spiritual systems connect? How do they connect upon the idea of the sacred feminine? So for example, you have the B and the J, the letters from the Temple of Solomon, but you have Egyptian lotus columns, you have the High Priestess wearing an Isis crown, she's holding the Torah, she's wearing the blue cloak of Mother Mary from Christianity, and she has pomegranates behind her referencing Greek mythology and the story of Persephone and Hades. All of these religions have had the archetype of the feminine mystic, right? So tarot basically says, okay, well, what can we pull from each of those religions or spiritual systems? And how can we make them cohesive to represent what is a foundational component of the human experience, of our own hero's journey or of our own fool's journey? So that's what tarot is, and that's what archetypes are. And that's why I love tarot, is because it's a way to fundamentally understand and work with and learn about all the other religious systems, because it incorporates so much. I'll take a quick look at a couple of your questions as we're going on, because I want to make sure this is an interactive conversation. So someone asked what my favorite tarot card is. That's the Hermit card is my favorite. Let's see, someone asked if tarot is dangerous. I would say no, tarot is not dangerous. It's just a method to help understand and improve your life. And someone asked, how far back do tarot readings go? Difficult question if you're asking specifically when tarot decks as a cohesive deck, the 78 cards was created. So that was mid-1400s in northern Italy. But the concept of working with archetypes in a mystical and spiritual way, that might go back further. But really, you know, when tarot cards pretty much came into being as how we see them today. That didn't happen until mid-1400s in Italy. But keep asking your questions as I'm going on, because I love to hear your thoughts as I'm chatting, and I'll try and answer them as we're going along. So we talked a bit about archetypes and how excited I am that one of the good things, at least, about Jordan Peterson's popularity is it's reintroducing the ideas of Carl Jung and the ideas of understanding archetypes as a foundational component to developing and working with the human experience or the universal experience. So another interesting thing that this conversation and his lectures are bringing to the table is he's really bringing mysticism, because Carl Jung can't really be divorced from the concept of mysticism. So he's bringing back mysticism into the conversation. And I think a lot of people are very quick to associate spirituality or mysticism with backwardsness or going back in time, losing progress. And I remember just, maybe like 5 years ago, I read Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion. Atheism was really catching fire in the local media, and books. Everyone was reading about atheism, reading articles about atheism. And I wonder if the interest in Jordan Peterson right now and his thoughts and his ideas is representing the shift away from atheism back towards perhaps a more mystical or spiritual thinking. And I think that I worry that, I have lots of atheist friends and I think they're great. So I don't necessarily think that, being an atheist is necessarily a bad thing. But I think if you take a materialist worldview, so the world is completely devoid of any wider spiritual meaning or devoid of the idea of a soul or something like that, that has been taking prominence for the past few years within society, and it has been growing. And I think that in the wider world right now, in this materialist worldview, when you're someone talking about, spirituality, I think that a lot of people just automatically assume that you're uneducated or that you are holding back progress in some way. And I think what Jordan Peterson is doing is he's showing that for people, as humans, maybe atheism isn't what's necessarily best for us. As humans, maybe we are innately spiritual in some way, and that to completely deny ourselves of that aspect might leave us kind of unfulfilled when it comes to our life and our own hero's journey, as Carl Jung would say. So perhaps that kind of the process of human development of consciousness that we've encoded in our mythology going way back. I think those ideas, those archetypes, that mythological thinking, it's intended. It's meant to be lived and experienced. It's not meant to be static or something necessarily just of the past. So I wonder then if Jordan Peterson and his kind of return to a more spiritualist mindset, maybe that is really the catalyst for the wider public slowly realizing that a materialist worldview is lacking when it comes to their own personal lives. And maybe what he's doing in this discussion of Carl Jung and the archetypes is he's kind of reanimating the idea of the sacred. And that his current popularity is showing that people are yearning for that. They want to experience the sacred in their lives. They want to interact with spirituality. So maybe this is a turning point, and his popularity is showing that we're shifting away from kind of the new atheism movement and a materialist worldview back into an archetypal and mythological understanding of the human experience, perhaps. I mean, I did not major in psychology, so I'm not going to be an expert in any of this, but I am pretty much an expert in tarot, or at least I'm learning to be one. So I hope that the more I learn about psychology, the more and more I'm really seeing it interact and have an interplay within tarot as a whole. So I think another interesting thing about this shift is that for a very long time, I think that mysticism in general has been kind of locked inside of a kind of a new agey box, right? Very maybe overtly feminine, safe, not bad necessarily, but I think the new age box doesn't really work within our contemporary society. And one of the things I'm trying to do is to explore, well, what comes next for mysticism after the new age? movement? How can I help break that box and take a archetypal way of thinking, take a mystic or spiritual way of thinking into the 21st century for a more contemporary audience? And what does that look like? Or at least that's something I'm trying to do with my website, Arcane Alchemy, and my business and my blog posts and videos. It's kind of a hope that we're moving away from the New Age into something new. Something new, and that's exciting. And I don't know where it's going to be headed, but I want to be part of that conversation, and I want to be part of that process. So let me take a look at your questions. Definitely keep on messaging as we're going on. It's been really good, reading your thoughts as I'm continuing. A lot of you guys are talking about ancient mysticism and even like Egyptian mysticism and things like that. And there's a lot of that in tarot. So quickly going back to the origins of tarot, while tarot cards as a physical object that were used probably doesn't go back to Egypt, the archetypes and the spiritual significance of those archetypes definitely does go back to Egypt. Because a lot of the mythology and a lot of the development of those archetypes come from Egyptian mythology. They come from the story of Isis and Osiris and Horus and Seth and things like that. And you see a lot of that in tarot, especially in certain cards like the Wheel of Fortune and the Chariot. But I don't want to get too much into that, but there's definitely a lot there to discuss. So I don't want to just talk about Jordan Peterson and talk about all the good things without touching on the controversy. And just kind of the controversy might also be in part because I think that there is a big fear among secular materialists that this increase in mysticism, this increase in more people looking up Carl Jung, this increase in more people looking up tarot, that this wider increase in mysticism could lead us back to fascism. So a lot of people always worry about that. And that probably comes from some fear of like, oh, well, Hitler studied the occult. So if anyone's studying the occult or mysticism now, then it's going to lead to a return to fascism, which I definitely don't think, is necessarily going to happen. But I do understand that people can find that scary. And even Freud, when he talked about Carl Jung, he talked about Carl Jung opening this black tide of mysticism. So there is this darkness that surrounds this conversation that makes it difficult to have a intellectual talk about it. And a lot of what Carl Jung talks about is our shadows internally and within society. So there is that darkness that can't be denied within the mystical world, within the mystical self, but at the same time being fearful that just because society is perhaps returning to a more spiritual worldview is going to lead to some political system, I think that's a bit unfounded. But I definitely see that there is that fear, among people. Another way that Jordan Peterson is very controversial is in his understanding of men and women. He talks about men and women and our differences. And that's obviously a touchy subject with many people. Feminism, the Me Too movement and everything like that. It's going to be a touchy subject. And his messaging in particular, it really appeals to men, especially millennial men that are my age. And I was wondering, well, why is that? Why does his talks appeal so much to men? And even some of his messaging or his kind of life rules, they're so simple. They're just like, clean your room. You need to figure out your life first, the basics, before you can hope to have a wider idea or a wider understanding about the more complex issues. And perhaps, one of the best things probably about his lectures is that he does inspire men to lead more responsible and meaningful lives, to take responsibility for their lives. And perhaps, you know, maybe it's just nowadays so many young men are growing up without a father figure that they really connect with Jordan Peterson's philosophy and kind of his tough love guidance. Perhaps that's it. I mean, I'm not a man, so I can't fully connect with how men are feeling nowadays, but I do know that it is an issue, and that there are a lot of young men that do feel lost. And I think that Jordan Peterson's rhetoric and his philosophy is appealing to that, because he does give that kind of father figure, tough love talks. And I think there's a need for that. Though I think, you know, perhaps maybe he goes a little too far in characterizing men and women by their differences. And I think that it's interesting when you think about, because there's a lot of duality, masculine and feminine, when you talk about tarot. So for example, you know, you have the magician and the high priestess, or the emperor and the empress. Things are often divided between masculine and feminine archetypes. But one of the messages being in tarot is to retain those ideas within balance within yourself, that you can have too much of one or the other, and that the goal should not to go specifically one way or the other, but to not be overwhelmed by one or the other, to kind of create balance within those, within yourself and in your own life. But I think that Jordan Peterson perhaps fixates on the kind of divisions between men and women a little too much, and that would just be one of my small criticisms, because overall I think what he's saying is really interesting. And I wonder too, because his talks, his ideas appeal to men so much, maybe what this will end up doing is bringing men more into the fold of mysticism, because I think that the New Age movement has been predominantly a female space, and I want to break that barrier and make it more accessible to both men and women equally. I want that this new form of mysticism to be open to everyone and open to differing, you know, opinions and thoughts and stuff like that. So maybe, you know, as he becomes more popular, this will lead to more men discovering Carl Jung and then discovering tarot, and using tarot as just another way to help improve their own lives. So that could be really exciting. We'll see what happens with that. I think that, you know, I think that it's interesting to see where this is headed in terms of the archetypes and Carl Jung's thinking and the greater influence of this kind of stuff in society. Definitely with him being such a controversial character, it is going to create polarization within the tarot community itself. And especially it touches on a touch point, because so much of tarot is, you know, based on describing feminine and masculine archetypes. And that can be a tricky conversation to have. And I think that, you know, we're going to be having that conversation more, you know, in the future. I think that this is a really exciting time to be a tarot reader. I think this is a very exciting time to be involved in the spiritual community, to be a spokesperson, and to have the ability and the platform, you know, to share these ideas and to have this conversation, because it's a conversation I think we all need to be having. And I'd love to know your thoughts and your ideas on Jordan Peterson, because he is such a polarizing figure. I want to know what you think about him. I know, you know, there's a lot of things I like, and then there's a couple things I'm not as much a fan on, but overall, I'm really excited to see where this goes, where his influence goes, because he is really influential right now and is helping people, and he is bringing people to reconsider the ideas of Carl Jung and the ideas of archetypes, and thus the ideas of tarot. So definitely keep messaging as I'm talking here because I want to know your thoughts on him. If you don't know who he is, definitely just YouTube afterwards, and you'll find like thousands and thousands and thousands of videos on his lectures. I'll get to a couple other of your questions. Oh, yeah, someone mentioned, I thought the High Priestess was paired to the Hierophant. Yes, you can definitely pair the High Priestess to the Hierophant, but you can also pair it to the Magician. That's one of the fun things about tarot is there's lots of connections between the cards. So the High Priestess and the Hierophant do have a lot of similarities and differences, but the Magician and the High Priestess do too, so it's kind of fun to see how those characters and how those archetypes mesh and how they differ. So definitely keep sending me your opinions. After this video is over, I'll take a look at all of your questions. So if I didn't get to them in this chat, I'll be able to answer them below in the YouTube comments. But I wanted to just have this chat with you. Let me know in the comments too if you like live videos. I know these are probably not as well done because I'm just shouting my ideas out there without much prep, but at least it's real, right? So let me know if you like these kind of unscripted live chats, and I'll keep doing them. And I just wanted to say thanks again, for watching. This is fun, checking out your comments as I'm going along, and I look forward to reading the rest of your comments and getting back to you. So I guess I'll talk to y'all later. Okay, bye.